I started a company that connected student organizations with brand sponsors. Do I get like a clicker or something? Great. Yeah, so given that I have these experiences with the different M&As, I just wanted to share some stories, the struggles and surprises that different founders have experienced through their journey. So my personal journey, I started a company that connected student organizations with brand sponsors. It's an online marketplace. And the challenge that I faced was getting more customers. So our team actually came from like different student organizations. We were leaders of like basketball teams or the business society, and we would always struggle to find sponsorship. That's why we started. We were great at talking to other students and getting them on board, but we're not so good at getting brands to come and sponsor. So what we started to do was look at different organizations or companies that do have a large network of brands. So agencies were our first kind of point of contact. And we started to discuss to see whether we could partner together. Those conversations gradually evolved, and we got some offers to buy us out. So we kind of shopped around, talked to a couple of different companies, and ultimately we landed on an influencer marketing platform based out of China, who were great at attracting brands because their founder had a long history in marketing and communications, but was less good at like talking to young people and getting them to sign up and get interested. So what happened was they did an acqui-hire. So they bought a company, brought in our team, and I was basically hired to become the VP of operations. Like most acquisitions, it didn't quite work out as we expected, namely because that founder and I had very different opinions on how to manage a team and to treat people. And so I moved on, and I started another company called Goodgrowth, and we're basically focused on helping social purpose founders scale their organizations. So in that process, I worked with Michelle. She actually happened to be an intern at Launch Pilots, my previous company, and she was out to solve a problem of student research. What she found is that most students, when they're writing a research paper, spend the majority of their time on finding sources, copying and pasting different lines, and then finding out how to do the citations, and then importing that back into the documents. So she basically thought this can be streamlined. And so she started Viva. And her challenge was monetization, because her product is a Google Chrome extension, which is just given away for free. And as she tried to figure out a way to commercialize it, she realized that students really can't afford to pay much. The schools weren't really willing to pay, and like librarians who also used it don't have any money. She thought about going into other markets, but since her mission originally was to help students, she didn't want to really go to find niche markets to monetize. So what she did was she sent out an investor update, an email to all of her investors about the situation. And one of them said, actually, I think this might be interesting for the legal space. So for legal research, this could actually be a really good tool. So he happened to be a lawyer himself and teaching law. So after some conversations, Michelle basically decided that this was a good path of transformation for the product. And the investor basically bought out the product. And Michelle became an advisor to the company. So after that, we actually spoke much more about her career and what to do next. And ultimately, she decided to join the South China Morning Post, one of the biggest, media companies in Hong Kong, in their growth department, so where she could also help with product design and innovation. Her biggest takeaway throughout the journey was this idea of like being true to yourself. So the first thing was she thought what was really helpful was being transparent, because she asked for help, she told the investors her challenges, and she got help in return. The second thing I think was that she really struggled with was the idea of, did we persevere enough? Did we try hard enough? Which is still unanswered and probably very hard to answer. And the last thing was staying true to her mission. There could be compromises that she could have made to make money, but she ultimately decided to choose students, which was why she started in the first place. So a different type of entrepreneur, this is Hubert, and he is actually a French engineer who joined an NGO working on China water issues. And in the process, he created this platform which basically aggregated data that could identify how different places and properties might be exposed to risks posed by natural disasters or climate change. So his biggest challenge was actually around uncertainty. So his contract with his NGO was coming to an end. They weren't able to give him funding to create a whole different product. And it's an enterprise product, which means the sales cycles are super long and it's hard to predict when there's going to be any income. So he was feeling that this was a pretty risky thing to do, and his background is not in kind of very entrepreneurial experiences. At this point, I introduced him to another customer of mine, and they were looking to expand their environmental product lines. And when they had a conversation, that client was interested in buying out his company. So he had a choice to make. He could choose kind of financial security and ability to build out his career, or choose to stay independent. Ultimately, he did choose to join this company. But there's an interesting thing here in this story where he didn't join immediately. What happened was the company brought him on to become the lead of a new product that they were incubating. And over that course of time, they actually decided not to go ahead with the M&A. What happened instead was that the company spun off the product that they were developing into a new company and then brought Hubert on to become the CEO of the new company. So his takeaway was that although the result of this was great, everybody was happy, it took 6 months where he was extremely anxious about the outcome. And there's also a huge risk of creating tension between the two CEOs because of this uncertainty, and while he's still working with the internal team, which basically can create some conflict of interest. So his advice is keep it short and basically cut to the chase when you're in the negotiations. And then the last story is from the other side of the table. So Kevin started his forest fire detection company when he met his co-founder Rex, who was a scientist. So Rex was building out these little robots to help with finding people in natural disasters, but had no idea how to commercialize. Kevin is a serial entrepreneur, and he put money into Rex's research lab and tried to help to commercialize the technology. The problem that they faced, though, was that they had predicted that this kind of technology would become part of the regulatory framework for most countries. Basically, most countries would put into their legislation that they need to have forest fire detection. And they thought this would happen over a course of a couple of years. The truth is, it really happens over a course of maybe decades. So he had pressure because he had raised a lot of money and he needed to give returns to investors. What he ultimately stumbled on was this idea of, so he's a very well-read entrepreneur. He looks at the market a lot. He looks at kind of this macro strategy. And he realized that they had built up a lot of assets, both in terms of hardware, software, and also this network of different customers that were in this space. So he thought, what if we could diversify our product lines by leveraging the assets that we already have? So he went into two different modes. One is to acquire other companies that have this similar background, basically a very strong technical team who built out strong technology but don't know how to commercialize and can leverage his company's assets. And the other one is to incubate new companies or new products within his existing framework. And this is basically how he and Hubert came together. So he actually acquired Hubert's company, the previous company, acquired Hubert into this new company to become the CEO, and he then became the chairman of multiple different companies under one portfolio. His biggest takeaway is that this is one way actually to really leverage his own comparative advantage. So it's partly a self-reflection, understanding what he's good at. He is good at this macro strategy, high-level thinking. But because he had to run this company with multiple product lines and be very hands-on, he didn't have the mental space or capacity to step back and see the bigger picture and the bigger market and opportunity that his company could really be addressing. So some final thoughts and takeaways from my experience and also the discussions with these various founders. I think the first one is at the beginning. What triggers somebody to think about selling their social enterprise? I think a lot of it comes down to monetization. And often social entrepreneurs have this challenge. Maybe it's because there's a fierce competition, or maybe because the market is moving slower than you thought, or maybe there's some lack of internal capacity. I think what we all could have done better is kind of taking a lot more time to do the preparatory work before launching into a social enterprise. I think a lot of these type of founders are very passionate and they really feel the problem that they're trying to face and the pain, but they may not go through the process of thinking, how could my plan go wrong? And I think this is one thing that could have changed the past for many of us, including myself. The second thing is during the process of the M&A, I think a lot of us were caught by surprises that we really did not expect. So for some, it was a great surprise that this investor was value aligned and interested in the business and could have the ability to acquire it. For others, we found that investors that we might have trusted all along were the ones that once the deal got on the table, blocked it because they didn't get what they wanted from the deal, which would mean actually that nobody gets anything if they don't get on board. And this is not only for investors, this could also be from your team members. So if the company wants to buy 3 of your team members, one of them defaults, that could be the end of the deal. So in this case, I think what is really important to do is invest in due diligence, not only of your investors, but also of your team. Really understand what's their motivation, what incentives they would like, to make sure that you know what chips you have in your hand when you're in the negotiation. The final thing is, when it really boiled down to the decision, maybe choosing amongst different options, different buyers, I found that most founders really made a personal choice. The first one, overwhelmingly, was not really kind of an intentional choice. Most founders were burnt out by this time, which also means that maybe they weren't able to make the best decisions at the time. So this is definitely something to be aware of. But on the actual active choice, a lot of founders chose their buyers based on location, whether they have to move, whether they have to travel a lot. And some of that is just based on their family. The second thing, which was a really big factor, was learning. So I think a lot of the founders decided to choose a certain path because they thought that this new company or this new buyer could give them the training exposure that they didn't get as individual or independent founders. I think here, it's important to note that you really need to know what you want, not only because this helps you when you're at the negotiating table, but also because ultimately it's your life, and you need to decide how you want to go about it. And when you're trying to balance a situation where there are multiple different stakeholders, investors, your team, your family, pulling you in different directions, you need to be the one that's certain about what you want and be able to ask for it when you're at the table. So I'm going to leave it there. I am very interested to talk about more issues around social founders and the difficulties they face. But if you want to learn more about founders, or if you want to help other organizations grow, check out these 2 links here. Thank you.
Sure. So I would like to suggest that if you have questions, that we do this now during the coffee break, right?
Sure. Mm-hmm.
Because then everybody has the chance to meet and to talk a little bit further, without us having to start again later when we're going to talk about autonomous driving, which will start at 4 o'clock. But I want to thank you a lot, and I'm sure that there are many people with questions. So. Thank you again.
Sure.
And see you here back on this stage, 4 o'clock, talking about autonomous driving, developments in Asia and developments in Europe with awesome speakers and a panel. So see you in 25 minutes. Thank you.